there seems to be a division of labor between my fellow discussant and myself. Just now, the discussant gave a very good micro-level discussion, looking into the details of the two papers. And I see my role from a different direction. I'd like to embed my discussion in some large trends. In other words, some macro-level discussion. The purpose is to generate some questions among the audience for these two paper presenters, along with some observations of some large trends. The conclusions from the paper by Li and Wu basically are three. Families of low socioeconomic status will have low educational attainment, remain poor, and live in relatively backward regions. Families of high socioeconomic status will have high educational attainment, accumulate wealth, and live in urban coastal areas. Disparities of poor and rich and of urban and rural areas will increase as a result of differentials in educational attainment. And the major implications from Park's paper include the following. In China, wages will inevitably rise. Labor market will become increasingly rigid. The cost of labor will increase without adequate increase in productivity. Wealth inequality will decline as workers' real wages improve. These are the main points from these two papers. Self-evident, powerful, and well supported by their empirical analysis. There are some questions that were raised by my fellow discussant as to some details to be clarified, but I'm not going there. Instead, I'm going to bring you to this picture, which you must have seen many times before. The vertical axis indicates the percentage of the economy of one of the three countries in the total of the three economies. And the area of the bubble indicates the relative GDP per capita. So the larger the the larger the area of the bubble, the higher the per capita GDP is. And the higher the position of those bubbles, the larger the size of the economy as indicated by GDP is. Recently, I had a trip to India in January. And there, my Indian friends told me, oh, there's a recent forecast by Goldman Sachs by which they advanced the transition a few years earlier. By 2045, India will have passed the United States to become the second largest economy in the world. By that time, China will have already passed the United States to take the #1 place by a few years earlier. So these were bold forecasts with very dynamic assumptions. Dynamic in the sense that there are uncertainties. Now, let's look at the two major trends in which those two papers were embedded. One is the inequality trend, and the other is the demographic trend. And China is faced with those two structural challenges. Whether the forecast by Goldman Sachs will come true or not largely depends on the assumptions, whether China could cope well with inequality or the demographic deficiencies. Okay, this is a curve that is well known to economists. When the economy grows on a per capita level, the level of inequality will first increase, then reach a stationary point that starts to decline. And right now, China obviously is on the left-hand side of the curve. China is climbing on the curve of inequality. Why inequality is an important issue? Well, For the past several weeks, the world was watching one area very, very closely. That was the Middle East. Political instability and turbulence happened in Egypt, in Libya, in other countries. And inequality is one of those problems. And right now, the Gini coefficient of China reached 47%, way above the 40% level of warning. And according to the World Bank and other reports, there has been a large increase in income inequality in China. And in the world, about 27 countries' Gini levels are higher than China. And actually, there are 2 additional countries, the Gini of which were above China's, the Philippines and Malaysia. And well, the size of the trends also indicate the rise of income inequality. And the national trend of inequality largely mirrors the increase in the disparity of the urban income and rural income. That was indicated by the yellow line. If you watch those 2 lines, the yellow line and the red line go together. And the other problem is the demographic challenge, or the inverted pyramid. From those 3 countries, definitely the dependency ratio is rising. The dependency ratio is defined as the percentage of the people who are old or who are too young to work as a percentage of those who are in the labor force. You see that in the early years, the dependency ratio was largely supported or largely underscored by the baby boomers. But in the later years, the 2050s, it was largely the result of a rising older population. And normally, developing countries would have a pyramid shape of demographic structure with a lot of young people in the bottom and very few old people on the top. This is the scenario for the 1990s. And currently, India still maintains that almost beautiful triangle, but the shape of China is not much so. In 2050, you can see there are many, many old people in China. And China will lose its competitiveness in certain part of labor force. And there are some descriptions about the future China population structure. One also says, by 2050, China could have 90 million people in the 85-year-plus bracket. What take the Western world to grow old in terms of time, China will do so just in a matter of 2 to 3 decades. Solutions: mass education, urbanization, pro-rural fiscal policies, knowledge economy, population growth to regenerate population. All those could be prescriptions for these 2 large structural issues China is facing. And this is one topic that attracts a lot of attention, both from academia and from the private sectors, nonprofit organizations, and the governments. Corruption is defined as a summation of monopoly and discretion minus accountability. I have about 50 seconds left, so I'm not going into those detailed discussion. But the questions or the problems I have for the audience as well as for the presenters could be summarized on this note. What does monopoly, discretion, and accountability imply to education and labor? In my mind, I think China should reduce the level of monopoly in a lot of areas, should increase the level of accountability, and should lower government discretion, giving more power to the people and entrepreneurs. That could help solve the long-term structural issues in many, many significant ways. I'll stop here. Thank you.